So, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Simon Lichter, co creator of Scholar Circle with Chai Mitzvah and founder of urbandoor.org. Tonight's Scholar Circle is an interview style program, a special briefing, an update on the US and Middle East with Dr. Saltzman. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 16th year. They are the sponsor of Scholar Circle and a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community through Jewish engagement programs. Learn more at chaimitzvah.org. The Scholar Circle program was inspired by Scott Shea. Scott is the founder and board president of Chai Mitzvah, who authored a best-selling book, Conspiracy U, a Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionist conspiracy theories from the left and the right of the political spectrum. You can purchase Scott's book along with accompanying curriculum, which has been taught to hundreds of college students and others for only $18 at chaimitzvah.org. The curriculum was also taught in a recorded series by Dr. Andrew Pessin, one of our notable Scholar Circle scholars. You will receive all this information in a follow-up email as well. Scholar Circle hosts lectures by prominent scholars, such as Dr. Saltzman tonight, every 2 weeks on topics related to Israel and the Jewish community geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues the Jewish community is facing. A recording will be sent to each of you and also shared on our website. We are excited to continue the program for free. Scholar Circle has engaged over 3,000 participants since 10/7. Your donation will enable us to keep this important program going. Please help us reach our goal of $40,000. To make a donation, simply go to chaimitzvah.org, click on the gold tab, and then you can select Scholar Circle and take it from there. Our featured scholar this evening, again, is Dr. Eli Saltzman, who is an associate research professor of Israeli Studies and the director of the Gilderhorn Institute for Israeli Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. His scholarship and teaching focus on international security, Israeli foreign and security policy, U.S. foreign policy, and political psychology. Dr. Saltzman is the author of Securitizing Balance of Power Theory, a polymorphic reconceptualization. He has also written numerous scholarly articles and book chapters, as well as commentaries in the LA Times, Haaretz, the Jerusalem Post, and other prominent outlets. Dr. Saltzman earned his PhD in International Relations in 2010 from University of Haifa and was a postdoctoral research fellow at the International Security Program, Belfer Institute for Science and International Affairs, John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. You can submit questions anytime throughout using the Q&A button on your screen on Zoom. Again, this lecture is recorded and will be available on our website, chaimitzvah.org, and also emailed to you next week. So let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Saltzman.
Thank you so much for having me, Simon. Always a pleasure.
Likewise. So talking about your background, your career spans foreign policy, U.S. foreign relations, and international security. What first drew you to this field of teaching?
Well, as an undergrad, I actually was more focused, or my interest was more focused on international politics, international security. And during my master's at the Hebrew University, I was forced by one of my professors to actually write a paper about Israel that is exclusively focused on Israel. And I found it really exciting and very intriguing and very enriching of what the topics were and how the people behaved, what the people thought, and how they conducted themselves in a certain period of time. And so this became something that accompanied some of the things that I wrote about. I still write things that are not necessarily related to Israel as such. But when I came to the United States back in 2012, I was asked to teach a couple of classes about Israel, and I found even the teaching, or perhaps the teaching as well, very, very, very exciting and very, very, I thought it was a wonderful experience for me. And I still believe that the students enjoyed it at the time, and they still enjoy it today when I'm at the University of Maryland.
As a director of the Gilderhorn Institute for Israel Studies with University of Maryland, College Park, how do you see the role of academic institutions shaping public discourse, especially around Israel and the Middle East?
Yeah, well, I'll say the following. Since October 7th, because this is where kind of the focus on Israel has been on in the past couple of years, I was arguing, and I'm still in the position that some of the discourse, certainly on campuses, is lacking two key elements. One is knowledge. A lot of people don't know about the region, not about Israel necessarily or just about Israel or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but about the region as a whole. This is one thing. So knowledge is something that I find lacking for the most part, not always, but to a large extent. And secondly, the lack of nuance, the idea that you can have all kinds of shades of black and white and gray. And so it's not necessarily one side that is right or one side that is completely wrong. There's a lot of in between, certainly in a place, in a region that is so fluid, so intricate, so complicated to understand as the Middle East. But nevertheless, I'm the director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies, as you said. We don't do, for example, hasbara or advocacy on campus. What we try to do is to teach. I don't see myself as an advocate when I'm in the classroom. I see myself as a professor or as a teacher, if you'd like. There's a poster on my door that says that education is not about memorizing facts. It's about thinking about the world. And so I try to inspire my students to think about the Middle East, to think about Israel, not necessarily to subscribe to one position or the other that I would advocate for or that I would present in class, but rather grapple with complexity, with multiple perspectives, with multiple viewpoints. I think this is something that makes my experience as a teacher more fulfilling, and I think it's more enjoyable and more insightful for the students.
We like that. We like that you're teaching critical thinking skills to the next generation
Absolutely.
and seeing many different sides for them to be better leaders and to tackle problems not just from one outlet but from many sort of perspectives. Diving right into Iran following the recent escalations, how would you assess their regional strategy? And what role do you feel the US is either playing in containing it or possibly reshaping it, especially in light of the US bombing their facilities?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the United States has played a significant role in the Middle East in general and in the context of Iranian-Israeli relations specifically. The United States has its own history with Iran, starting from the 1950s with the overthrow of Mossadegh, the Iranian Revolution of 1979, the failed attempt to rescue the hostages from the embassy in Tehran, and so on and so forth. But certainly the decision by the Trump administration, by Trump himself, I would argue, to attack Iran's nuclear facilities is a major turning point in the history of the Middle East. To be honest, I was interviewed twice on the day of, on the Thursday of, and I was asked point blank whether the United States will indeed attack Iran's nuclear sites. And I said, difficult to say. It is very difficult to know. There's one individual who basically controls the policymaking process in the United States, that's Donald Trump. It is very unpredictable. It is not clear to what extent he is committed to certain principles of policymaking, whether he reads memos, whether he reads the briefings, and whether he communicates with others within the administration, advisors, and so on and so forth. So it was very difficult. But I think that nevertheless, I think that his decision at the end of the day to attack the Iranian nuclear sites has opened a whole wide of opportunities for the future of U.S.-Iran, U.S.-Iran-Israel relations. And case in point, I saw it just a couple of minutes ago that the United States has identified with its European allies a new deadline for concluding a new nuclear deal. I think it's September, but don't get, I'm not so sure. There's another deadline that was earlier today was presented to the Russian government, to Putin himself, to end the war in Ukraine. So I might be conflating the dates. But in any case, the United States is engaged. The United States is involved. The United States is actively involved in this crisis, in this ongoing escalating crisis.
In your viewpoint, looking at the Trump administration compared to previous presidential administrations for the US, how does that differ? Is it, in your opinion, better, worse, or still kind of unknown at this stage?
Yeah. So one main thing is that Trump was president already, took a break, and then came back. So there's something about that, first of all. And secondly, he's not your traditional politician, nevertheless, despite the fact that he had a background now as a president in 2016. But he's not your traditional politician as such. I think that he's kind of an outsider looking into the inside of policymaking, trying to change. His approach is quite different. He's a businessman, in my opinion, and
Right.
that kind of projects on the way that he engages the international political environment. He's very transactional. I want to know what I get in return for what I give. His ability to rely on or perhaps to abide by commitment is limited by this transactional approach. Case in point is the relationship between the United States and NATO, or the United States and its European allies, and this idea that we've been carrying the massive load of your military expenditures for so many years, from 1945 onwards, and so on and so forth, and you guys don't do anything to show any gratitude. Case in point was one of the exchanges that Trump and J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, had with Volodymyr Zelensky in this infamous or famous interaction in the White House, in the Oval Office, where he says, you got to be more thankful. Say thank you. You got to be more grateful for what we've done for you, for Ukraine. And if it weren't for us, you'd be all completely defeated by now. So there's a transactional nature there. And I think that as such, he's very unpredictable. It is very difficult to ascertain where he's heading to. But this is not to say that leaders in the region don't know how to try and find ways, identify ways for him to communicate with him, my apologies, or to perhaps, in a sense, try to find ways to pander to his ego. Last week, Benjamin Netanyahu was in the White House. He submitted this request that he submitted to the Nobel Peace Prize Committee as a way to indicate, I see you, I know what you're trying to do, and I support you fully. And perhaps there's an expectation in return for President Trump to to do something for the Israelis, for Benjamin Netanyahu specifically, perhaps.
Well, talking about allegiances, do you feel that this United States policy of deterrence still holds true for Iran? They seem to lean into Russia and China and further alienate those two countries from the US. Do you feel that that it's working, or they're just using it to embolden our enemies and fuel more hatred coming and more trouble coming from Hezbollah and the Houthis and other proxies that Iran kind of, they bid out for their business and say it wasn't us, and they've been doing that. Of course, we all know that. Do you feel this deterrence is actually working?
Well, there's two ways to approach it. One is, let's take the Israeli perspective. One is that Israel was effectively able to basically decapitate Hezbollah. They assassinated Hassan Nasrallah, the general secretary of Hezbollah, the famous pager operation that blew up more than 3,000 units. They had more in line, but it didn't work, or they didn't launch that either. Syria fell. Bashar al-Assad escaped. He's in Moscow. He sought diplomatic refuge there. Houthis are a major problem, certainly still firing every now and then ballistic rockets. For the most part, they're intercepted by the Israeli systems. So certainly after the 13-day war, Iran is dramatically more vulnerable and weaker. The Israeli Air Force was able to engage targets there pretty much unrestrictedly. It was free to do whatever it wanted. I would argue that perhaps paradoxically, compared to other presidents before him, both Biden and Obama, perhaps, I think that Trump is perceived as more credible. He's more fluid in terms of the way that he makes decisions, and he can change. He can flip on change his mind on a dime. But nevertheless, there's at least a perception that he's willing to go the full length of the way. And whether he's considering military attacks against Iran, or crippling sanctions against Russia, or emphasizing or arming Ukraine, as it was reported just the other day by the Wall Street Journal, to increase the amount of military capabilities flowing to Ukraine. So I think there's a lot of, at least a deterrent that has been effectively established after the attack, the American attack against the Iranian nuclear sites. Whether that will be leveraged to achieve a new nuclear agreement with Iran, that remains to be seen. The Americans are interested. The Iranian foreign minister said that they're willing to entertain this idea. But at the same time, there seems to be reporting that both the Americans and the Israelis already agreed that if Iran tries to resuscitate its nuclear facilities to rebuild some of the sites that were attacked, then Israel will have a green light once again to attack these sites. Nevertheless,
Right. Yeah, it seems that whenever there's a delay with Israel's and the US's enemy, they use that opportunity to rearm and to re-strategize. We have a question from our members tonight about Trump walking away from the Obama administration era's nuclear agreement. Do you, in your opinion, if he didn't walk away, would that have changed the circumstances today, or walking away just sort of sped up the what was to come anyways?
yeah, so it's a brilliant question, and it kind of relates to a kind of a difficult position of anybody who does social sciences, and this is kind of virtual history, kind of the what if, the alternative, I don't know, revolving doors kind of a principle. It's very difficult to say. I will say the following: 2015, the JCPOA that was signed had multiple flaws, but it had a lot of advantages. One of which was the very intrusive, very continuous inspection regime. There were literally IAEA inspectors on the ground in Iran. They had 24 hours CCTV footage around the clock. It was very, very invasive and very, very, very effective in that regard. Whether that, at the same time, it didn't address two key issues that both the Israelis and some others in the region were afraid of, and one is the destabilizing policies that were promoted by Iran, this idea of supporting Hezbollah and some forces, some elements in Syria, certainly Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip as well, and the Houthis in Yemen. It didn't address the ballistic missile program, which was also, as we evidently saw just a couple of weeks ago, extremely destructive for regional actors. Israelis were killed during these attacks. Buildings were completely demolished as a result of that. And the JCPOA that focused exclusively on the nuclear dimension did not address these two elements. The consensus in Israel, in the Israeli defense establishment, was that it's an imperfect, not a perfect agreement, but it's good nevertheless, given the circumstances. And it does a very effective job in terms of slowing down and completely halting Iran's military nuclear program. Benjamin Netanyahu was one of those who advocated for abrogating the agreement. He was able, according to some reports, some sources, to convince Donald Trump to unilaterally withdraw from the agreement. It is difficult to say or to answer the what if question. But again, even the chief of staff at the time, the head of the Israeli Mossad, and others in Israel argued that albeit imperfect, the agreement is nevertheless something pretty good from Israel's national security perspective.
Continuing with regional dynamics, there seems to be a perception of this polarization of the US and Israel constantly going after these proxy groups, and with Hamas, and again with Hezbollah and the Houthis, and the bombing. There seems to be no, wars are not usually fought with such media attention. We feel that if such media attention was on the Vietnam War, there's no way it would have lasted that long, and the US would have pulled out way, way sooner, and they would have been maybe demonized to this day. There seems to be this, we talk about a double standard with Israel. We talk about the destruction rate, or the ratio between combatants and innocent lives, and how they have such a tight ratio, and one of the best, or the best in the world, in terms of collateral damage. And fighting an urban warfare is so complicated. How do you feel this is dividing both Washington and Jerusalem in terms of that? Do you feel that there's there's going to be enough patience for this war to continue on? What do you feel like from your point of view, what you have maybe shared with students or the students that have given feedback or your personal opinion from like the public opinion level between these two countries? Um, it just seems like there's a lot of destruction and pages, our media is just constantly showing images of people waiting for water and food and then people hospitals being blown up and terrorist attacks. Like how do you see this playing out over say the next year?
Well, first of all, we got to say that there are negotiating teams now talking in Doha, in Qatar, trying to engage one another and find a solution, trying to find at least a ceasefire or conclude a ceasefire agreement. The Israelis have submitted a revised version of some of the maps that they introduced during Benjamin Netanyahu's visit here in the White House last week. I just read a report saying that an Israeli source within the delegation said that there's some indications that there's optimism, kind of cautious optimism in the air in a way. I think that according to most of the polls in Israel, about 70% want the war to end and for all the hostages to return home. There's a lot of layers there. There's an argument. There was a major piece in the New York Times just a couple of days ago that basically showed the degree of politicization of the process from Israel's perspective, specifically Benjamin Netanyahu during the Biden years or the Biden period, and how I would argue kind of decisions were made based on political electoral needs rather than strategic imperatives, if you wish. It is difficult. The Palestinians are suffering in the Gaza Strip. There's no doubt about that. Although there's debates about the numbers, whether Hamas's numbers are indeed 56, 70, 80,000 people or not, it's besides the point. You see massive destruction around the Gaza Strip, infrastructure, universities, hospitals, and so on and so forth. So there's no question about that. I think that the main issue, something that was at the center of the debates between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government was the day after plan. What do you want to do? How do you want to get there? This is something that the Israeli government resisted for a long time. Benjamin Netanyahu insisted on winning or a definitive, decisive victory, and only then thinking about the day after. The problem is that after 2 years, you basically destroyed Hamas, not completely, not entirely. That is true. Israeli soldiers are killed. Every now and then you have a rocket fired from the Gaza Strip. But for the most part, they were decimated. The structure of Hamas, my apologies, has dramatically been downgraded. So what do you do now? There's all kinds of ideas, a humanitarian city. I hope this is not something that the Israeli government will seriously consider. There's a cabinet meeting starting at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I think that kind of displacing Palestinians in that way is horrible, both from a moral perspective and an operational one. So I hope they don't do that. The Americans are very eager to facilitate, to mediate a ceasefire agreement. Steve Witkoff will travel to Doha once they see the American administration see that there is any prospect that they can sign the deal. Trump, as we know, is very eager to finish the whole thing. He wants to focus on other things. He wants to, I argue, like many others, he wants to be a Nobel Prize, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate at one point in time. So there's an incentive there. What will happen? Once again, very difficult to say. I think that there's a lot of, we've seen the footage from the campuses in the United States in the past couple of years, very difficult ones. I'm very happy, I'm very proud of College Park. My campus, for the most part, was very peaceful. There were protests, there were events, there were teachings and all kinds of other activities. But for the most part, nothing major happened, certainly not in the level that we've seen of violence or blocking, verbal and physical assault. I think it will trickle down further and it will kind of accompany us here in the United States and in Israel for many, many years. The war in Gaza is unlike anything that Israel engaged in the past since 1948, given the fact that October 7th was unprecedented in Israeli history, certainly since the Holocaust. So there's going to be a lot of time to reflect and to reckon with what has transpired and what will the relationship between Israel and the United States will look like, what the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians will look like, and what the relationship between Israel and some of the Arab states in the region will look like in the future.
Talking about this long-term strategy and security, you mentioned some targeted operations like the pager incident, and that was we understand that was many months, or if not years, in the making to infiltrate manufacturing of these pagers and putting in these detonation devices. What do you feel is Israel's security needs, that they should be focusing on with these shifting alliances and the uncertainty of the future? What do you feel they're going to need to uh, create more like border control and investing in these long-term sort of secret missions, or diplomatically try to drum up more support from the world and from our allies? How do you see these like long-term strategy for the security? And it's called the IDF Defense Forces, and it's very unfortunate that we have to activate that on an ongoing basis. What do you see for the future of Israel in terms of
Well, I teach a
security?
class on Israeli foreign security policy. One of the things that I teach and I show and I try to show effectively to students is that Israel is, when it comes to military affairs, national security, is not very good when it comes to long-term planning. Unfortunately, there's a wonderful book by Chuck Freilich who wrote about that, Science Dilemma. There's all kinds of structural, regional, as well as institutional reasons for that. It's a whole semester. If you want to attend that class, please drop by campus in the spring, though. So Israel has a problem in long-term planning. So I think that one of the issues, one of the challenges is to put military means as part of a bigger, broader, more pronounced, more profound national security strategy that Israel doesn't have as such. And by that I mean, I'm going to butcher Clausewitz's quote, a military is just an extension of diplomatic means in that sense. And so the pagers, albeit a very impressive operational success of the Israeli government or the Israeli military, as well as the intelligence force establishment, there needs to be a day after. There needs to be a diplomatic or a political logic to it. So far, when it comes to the pagers or Hezbollah, it seems like that the Lebanese government is trying to act forcibly vis-a-vis Hezbollah, trying to eliminate the presence of a paramilitary or a completely militarized group within the state, trying to reclaim the monopoly over the use of military might or military power. I saw a report earlier today that the central bank in Lebanon has prohibited donations to go to one of the agencies that Hezbollah ran for many years, aid agencies. But again, it's the question of what do you want to see the day after? How do you see the political landscape in the Middle East more broadly? And I think that this is, in part, very difficult to Israelis to plan towards, but specifically, I think that in this case, the Israeli prime minister is quite reluctant to engage in these questions because they involve a lot of political issues that, from his perspective, are extremely divisive inside from a domestic politics perspective. The Gaza war is one expression. The other one is Syria. What do you do? Israel is now inside Syria, now operating to protect some Druze communities that are being attacked by the supporters of al-Jolani, the current president of Syria. But what do you do next? Do you go back to the agreement from 1974, the disengagement agreement? Do you try to settle the conflict with Syria altogether and sign a peace agreement and then perhaps give up the Golan Heights? What do you do about Lebanon? Shaba Farms is a region on the border between Israel and Lebanon. Do you try to engage the Lebanese government and find a territorial compromise that will facilitate a peace agreement? So I think that there's a lot to do. I think that it needs kind of a more a broader perspective, one that incorporates military capabilities, military means into politics, diplomacy, certainly public diplomacy, to achieve greater, bigger, more important goals.
This issue is clearly, for the defense of Israel, is clearly very complicated, sophisticated. And like you said, it's not a one size fits all. Like they just need to do this. They need to
Yeah.
do a lot of different things over the next several years. when you're in the classroom and you're speaking with the students and they're taking your course, most likely interested going into politics or uh, some sort of realm in foreign policy, is there a blind spot that you see in either Jerusalem or in Washington's policy that you just wish that the current leaders today would be more mindful of? So when you're with these students, do you feel there is a particular blind spot that you're trying to encourage them to focus on as they become the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, but certainly when it comes to Israel, but also about the Middle East more broadly, I would argue that Israel is not a monolith. Like the Arab world is not a single actor, a unitary actor as such. There are different actors. There's a lot of dynamics inside the Arab or the Muslim world. There's a lot of things happening inside Israel as well. So the levels or the intricacy of ethnic division, religious division, socioeconomic are so overwhelming that just painting it with one color, to my mind, is a bit too simplistic, and it's counterproductive to understanding this very important, I would argue, and certainly central region of the world. The fact that the United States has attacked Iran, the fact that the United States has been supporting Israel since 1948, means that the United States is invested there. So I would argue that future leaders or anybody else for that matter, just educate yourself, learn more. You can have a critical view, you can have a supportive view. I don't care about your political outlook in my classroom as long as we engage civilly, as long as we address the topics, as long as it's a fact-based conversation. You're more than entitled to your own opinion. Just be able to kind of to defend or to present it coherently, if you like. I love debates. Coming from Israel, we disagree about pretty much everything and anything. Perhaps it's a Jewish thing, I don't know. But nevertheless, conversation is critical, and just pulling out, just closing the door, shutting down the door. I think it's the wrong way to go about this.
Do you have any final insights you want to leave the audience with tonight about our U.S. and Israel relationship? Sounds like I think it's certainly a Jewish cultural thing. I think Israelis have it a little bit more pronounced than American Jews on this eagerness to debate. I always say that Israelis seem to grow up faster, and maybe that's where they get it from. But yeah, is there anything you want to leave the audience tonight? Maybe on a positive note, about the relationship between
Yeah.
our two countries.
Yeah, so it's very difficult to remain optimistic given everything that is happening both here in the United States and in Israel, in the region and beyond that. But I will say the following: I'm I'm concerned about long-term prospects or long-term trends that I see both here in Israel, in the United States, my apologies, as well as in Israel. But I think that there's hope. I think that for the most part, both countries share a past, they share values, they share interests, they share the curiosity. They benefit one another, I believe, in many, many ways. I wrote about that in the past. I am concerned about the prospects, especially given the war in Gaza, and what does that do to the ability of Israelis and Americans to engage freely and directly. I am hopeful that in the future, once the conflict ends, there will be a space for both Americans and Israelis to kind of to think or perhaps to revisit some of these principles and try to revisit and rethink about some of the elements that we took for granted and try to pursue and explore new avenues for cooperation or for interaction from a people to people, society to society, and so on and so forth. I am a director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies, and as such, I think that studying about Israel, studying about the relationship between Israel and the United States is not only rewarding intellectually. I think it's a fascinating and extremely important topic. But I think it's also beneficial for both parties, for both sides. Again, we are invested in one another's life, so to speak. Americans provide significant amount of aid to Israel, almost $4 billion a year. Israelis travel to the United States. They see the United States as the most important source of influence. When I grew up in the 1980s in Israel, I watched Dallas and Dynasty, and I loved it. when my parents didn't prevent me from watching that due to kind of all kinds of uh, inappropriate scenes on the screen, on the small screen. But there's a long-standing, enduring connection between these two countries, between these two societies, and I just hope we can find a way to transcend, to go beyond some of the difficulties that we've been experiencing in the past couple of years.
So thank you, Dr. Saltzman, for your insightful presentation, as always. Our next Scholar Circle features Yehuda Barsky, and the topic will be a timeline of hate, major anti-Semitic incidents and attacks in the U.S. since the 1960s on Wednesday, July 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you again, Eli.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you so much for attending this event.